We expect to have at least one more member council just broke. Before we get started, just to remind those who are here, you have to put in a public comment card if you wish to speak on an individual item, or a public comment card on if you want to speak on an issue that within the purview of this committee, but it's not on the agenda. So we have no cards this time, so we can go to item 1.
Item number 1 is a verbal report from the General Manager, Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, relative to the status of updating the roster of neighborhood councils on the department's website and the department's email distribution list with current information on neighborhood councils.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Bunglan Cam, General Manager, Department of Neighborhood Empowerment.
Okay. You can give us a verbal update on the progress of the web page and the board member email list, and I believe the email of whether the city can provide emails.
Right. This is a carryover from the prior committee meeting, and I believe your staff reached out to the ITA, and we haven't been able to meet. So if we could have a meeting with the ITA to explore the possibility of providing city email accounts to each of the neighborhood council board members. I believe that's the direction that you were indicating you wanted to go at the last agenda item.
We want to explore that. I don't know what the cost or the labor factor, but we certainly like to find out how that can happen, and if we have a standardized email, whether that makes it easier for the department and the rest of the city to communicate with board members.
Right. And I support that direction, and that's something that we could explore with ITA and be ready to report back at the.
So we'll hold that the next month's meeting regarding the city emails.
Yes.
Okay.
The website is currently being updated. We lost our only IT staff person, and so the department has been without an IT position for over 3 months now. Mm-hmm. So we've pretty much been at a standstill in terms of our ability to do any work on our additional work on our IT services, but we prepared some outreach capacity with our website, and that's the main purpose of reaching out to stakeholders in preparation for the upcoming elections. But again, until we get our ITA position replaced, our ability to do anything with the website will be minimal.
Okay. Now, has anyone made an assessment of the current condition of the website? How much work will be required? Is it something that it requires a complete overhaul? Is it just add-ons, things of that nature?
Well, it seems the last time we checked data, the main traffic that was being generated to our website was around the funding program. Mm-hmm. So most people wanted to see, if you look at our website, it has a whole section on the funding program, which lists all of the city-approved checks that have been paid, all of the P-card transactions. It also includes the number of audits that are outstanding. So all the key performance indicators for each neighborhood council is on our website. That's usually when our website goes down, that's usually where we hear the most complaints and calls in terms of making sure that information is current.
Okay. Is that a website managed by an outside resource, or is that a city-managed website?
It's a city-managed website, but we've been working to augment that with some WordPress type of website platform, because we haven't been able to get the assistance of the city's ITA to make sure that our current website is being designed and to conform with city standards.
So the thing is, so you're saying the loss of the IT person, and then what ITA is not able to absorb what you need done?
I reached out to ITA and asked them if they could provide us with some assistance in making sure that our website is current and being able to, for people to be able to access easily. And they said currently that they didn't have that ability to provide that service to us.
Is the issue on the website updating and adding material, or is it just a matter of keeping what's there current?
It's both. When we did have the IT person who developed our website, he developed it in a programming language that is not readily available among city IT staff. So when he left, we basically lost the ability to reconfigure and update and modernize our website. So we currently have very limited ability to do that because we lost the IT person who developed the website.
Was that an ITA person that did that?
Correct. Well, it was a IT systems analyst too.
I mean, but it was a city employee. But would there be standards, if you know, in ITA as it relates to what software you use when you're doing a city webpage, so that we don't have the same situation where when he leaves, basically goes by the wayside?
Well, when I last checked with ITA, they said they were developing a template that could be used by other city departments, but that currently their priority was to work with elected offices, and that currently it wasn't available to departments.
Well, again, they were working with elected offices, because what I understand on many of the elected offices, they've gone to outside, outside resources for the flexibility of being able to change it and things of that nature. So I don't know how many council offices that they are currently managing, because what was it, what is it, we have map something? Sorry? What's the vendor that does our web page? Map something. But that was the thing, that's what I'm wondering, is how many that actually are done by ITA. Because it's my understanding that many council offices have gone to a private vendor to do theirs.
Jeff Brill, Neighborhood Empowerment. The IT's position is somewhat specialized because of the applications that the department uses. ITA doesn't really have the staff or is up to the programs and applications that the department uses. They are trying their best to work with us. However, though, we are in the process of hiring a new position for that individual, but it takes a little bit of time. We have to go through the normal processes and normal steps of hiring that position.
But what I understand is that maybe it's two different issues. Is it how complex your system is that requires that expertise, or is it that ITA just doesn't have the resources? I'm trying to figure out what's the complexity. Is it that your system is so complex because of the nature in which you, or the items that you put on it? Is that what the issue is?
Well, Councilman, I would say it's a little bit of both, because when we developed our original website, the IT person that we had on staff basically learned a programming language called .NET Nuke. My understanding is most of the city staff are fluent in a programming language that is Cold Fusion. So the technical requirements or the technical skills required to update the website we currently don't have, and ITA doesn't have as well. That is the main barrier. We would love to explore the way the elected officials are doing it in terms of seeking outside vendors to make sure that our website is updated and current, but we don't currently have that option.
Okay, and you have you had a position and it was lost, what, in the budget, or just that was it managed hiring or what?
Managed hiring.
Okay. Now, on the funds saved while going through managed hiring, are those funds available if you need outside technical assistance?
We do have salary savings, and that option would be available if we had council support to do that, yes.
But now, are those funds going to disappear at the end of this fiscal year, or are those funds encumbered at those salary savings?
We're hoping to encumber it so that we can continue to meet our department's priorities.
Okay. So how do you intend to do that as far, and how much is it?
It's roughly $120,000 in salary savings, and we're requesting that it be transferred to contractual services, so we could use it to. One of the things that we could definitely use it for is to enhance our website, but there are also short-term needs that we have in terms of making sure that the funding program is keeping up with the increase and the spike in demand warrants that are coming in. But we have a number of short-term personnel needs that make up for the fact that there's increased workload at the year end.
So what's the vehicle you're going to use to encumber that money if it's not been swept already?
We submitted it with our monthly financial report to CAO's office, and we're going to try to encumber it, moving it over from salary savings contractual services and working with CAO to encumber those funds under some type of contract or some type of personnel agreement.
Okay. Let me ask the CAO, do you know if those funds are still there that they're talking about? Did they get swept? Are they in next year's budget already? Or
Councilmember Delilah Pucho with the CAO. We're currently working on the department's year-end FSR. There is approximately $120,000 remaining. However, the department has requested to use that amount to purchase an electronic platform system. I'm not sure if our office is going to consider an electronic platform system yet. We still need further information before we would consider transferring that amount to the department's contractual services account.
what's the electronic platform? Is that dealing with the
That was something that we were working with Councilman Krikorian when he was chairing this committee. And basically what it is a automated way to administer the funding program. I believe that is really the ultimate solution to our funding program. So basically it would be a web-based way in which neighborhood councils could submit check requests, demand warrants, that would then be posted and tied electronically with their annual budget submission. And then we could process the payment requests electronically. So basically they would have a visual, the neighborhood councils and the department would have a visual dashboard in terms of where their demand warrant requests are in process. That would then, we're also coordinating with the controller's office to make sure that the city's financial management system is syncing on a regular basis. You know, other departments, I went to see Parks and Rec, for example, they have a very similar setup, in which case their facilities, they have some roughly 100 facilities. They're kind of mini cost centers, and they have a tracking system, which is basically, again, written in a program code that they developed in-house. But since we don't have that ability, we would, I would seek to get an outside vendor. And so we've actually brought in a consultant to do a systems design and analysis and needs assessment based on what our current state is. You know, had several meetings with key stakeholders and city department stakeholders as well, and came up with a very comprehensive list of system requirements. And it would be our desire to go out to RFP to select the vendor. So that is what our request would be.
Okay, is that part, would that be part of the web page, or is that a standalone system?
That would be standalone for the most part, but it would also have a web-based component. How much it syncs with our current website, we would have to go through that should we be able to select the vendor.
Okay, so that's what you're proposing on the year end. Now, are you now saying you're going to redirect that to the web page, or where are we now?
Some of that could be used for upgrading our current website, but you know, again, it was a combination of different needs that we have. One is to make sure that we're keeping up with the increase in the demand warrants and the year-end closing procedures. It's the electronic platform, as well as making sure that our website is updated.
Okay, now, is this something that you're building outside of ITA and that someone else would have to maintain it?
Yes, it is. The contractor or the vendor would be responsible for updating it, and that would be a part of their service agreement. But we've been working very closely with ITA on this process as well. They supplied the consultant that went through this whole process.
Let me ask Theo, now you said you're not, at this time with the FSR, you're not looking to approve that, or you need more study, or what?
Oh, the CAO has not reviewed any contracts with the department at ITA with the current consultant to see what the intent is of the consultant or the outcome to justify an electronic platform. Also, in a meeting I had with the department about a month ago, it was my recommendation that internal procedures be fine-tuned prior to implementing any electronic platform. So at this time, in preparing the FSR, we have yet decided whether or not we are going to transfer that surplus what the surplus amount is, and if it will go to the department for the purchase of an electronic platform system.
So at this time, it's not encumbered?
No, they have not encumbered it.
So is it just as likely to be swept?
It can be, yes.
Has there been any discussion with the CAO about the need of the upgrade of the webpage?
No, the departments only submitted in the FSR the need for an electronic platform. There has not been any discussions or requests to encumber funds or transfers for any web page building or to support any such services.
One other thing I was wondering is that when you say that there's a need to streamline the processes now, from hopefully there's a lot of progress made since the 2010 audit by the controller, but has there been any assessment of how much work there needs to be done to streamline before you can look electronically?
I don't know how much work specifically has been enhanced since the audit, but in speaking with the department, I believe that they can fine-tune some procedures before they go to the next level of an electronic platform. And I've made this recommendation to them in a meeting we had last month. I'm sure the general manager will not agree with my assessment, but they cannot submit just report on accounting for each neighborhood council account. You know, they're behind in processing payments, and also the encumbrance policy. I had requested a copy of the encumbrance policy, and that is not located on the website or found anywhere. I believe that the general manager sends out a letter every year saying what the deadline is, but specifically to illustrate to a neighborhood council, this is how you encumber funds, and this is what we need. That doesn't exist anywhere. So it seems like there's a few things that need to be fine-tuned for neighborhood councils before we could leap to this next level.
And when you say fine-tune, is that also looking at how each neighborhood council reports, and are they using standardized spreadsheets and things of that nature?
Correct.
And did Rita Moreno manages the funding program? I think she had something to add.
I just wanted to add, we have been actually making some improvements in terms of the funding program. We are processing demand warrants in 2 to 3 weeks, something that was...
Do this, is we're going to have a whole discussion about
Okay.
finances in a minute. I just want to kind of figure out where we are on the web page and the board members' emails to communicate. Then we'll get
Okay.
to the demand warrants and things like
Okay,
that. Thank you.
then just let me then talk about the web page issues, because there is a need to update and keep the web page current in terms of the funding program. Part of the problem, and that's part of the responsibility that I would be doing, but we can't, because we can't access the web page, we can't make changes to it, we can't, upload documents easily, what have you. Those are some of the issues that we're having, which is part of the discussion that the general manager is
Because it sounds
discussing.
like what you're saying is that the web page and it's upgraded and such precedes going to the platform. You got to have the web page functional. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, how I would view it at this time is that if we were to go ahead with the e-platform, that would probably be a better source of making sure that all the data is available and current and real time. The current website is a real one-off solution in terms of us being able to provide a transparent way for neighborhood councils to see all expenses that have been paid. Basically, we're downloading data from the city's financial management system and uploading it into our website, which is not the smoothest way for us to do that. So when we lose an IT position, then we lose the ability to keep that current.
But when you say you're doing that, is that electronically or is that manually you're doing that?
It's manually. It's basically what they call a flat file. So basically, we're downloading data from the city's financial management
I mean,
system
you're doing that electronically.
but it's manual.
Councilman Parks, I think on the issue of the encumbrance and the non-sweeping of the funds and the final FSR, part of what we want to do is we've been consulting in meetings with IT and what our direction and what we have to go in, and we are going to have to go out to RFP for any type of e-platform type. What we're saying is that, look, we'll work with the CAO's office in any type of issue and go through the proper city's contracting procedure, including RFP. We just don't want to see that the money be swept, so we'd rather have the money encumbered, transferred over, even into the department or into the fund account as a hold pattern, so that when we do have the funds available when we go out to bid and when we go out when we go through the contracting process. That's part of what we're saying as well.
No, I understand that, but I think the dilemma that I'm hearing from the CAO, if they haven't even evaluated whether they would agree that you have that platform, then it's very difficult to encumber the money for something that they haven't completely got their arms around to say that's not only necessary, but it's necessary at this time. And so I think that's a dilemma. So if we've been working in a vacuum without them, then we end up with a situation where they have to do the approval, and they're saying they're not sure that's the right expenditure of the funds. And then in the middle of the meeting, we're saying, well, we kind of think that some of the money could be used for the web page, and the problem there is we don't know how much or whatever, and they're going to have a lot more specific information to decide what they're going to do with that $120,000+. They're just not going to kind of leave it in limbo, I don't think.
And we'd be happy to work with the CAO and brief them on the work that our consultant has completed, because it is a pretty comprehensive system design review that has been completed, and we'd be more than happy to do that.
Yeah, all I would have recommended that should have been on the front end, so that when they finish their work, they'd be more apt to say, we agree. Now you're going to ask them to step in the middle of the process and say, do you agree with what the consultant has done? And by the way, can you pay for it? I think that's the dynamic that I'm hearing. Let me ask the CLA on any comments on the web page or things of that nature, in the sense of the three items that we're reporting on the web page are the issue of the emails system for the city, and also updating the board members' emails.
Paul Smith, CLA. During your hearings out in the individual neighborhoods on neighborhood councils, one of the most prominent and most frequently heard complaints was the lack of utility of their website and the accuracy of the information that was presented there. And there was a sense on your part and the committee's part that one of their vehicles to get to the individual NCs was to the website. It was an important vehicle to get the message and the word and the information distributed in an efficient way. If that information is either old or inaccurate or not of use to the different board members and to the stakeholders, then something has to be done to make that a more current, viable, and effective way of assisting and supporting the neighborhood councils. While the electronic platform has been discussed in the past as a mechanism of helping them to get accurate information and reporting and accounting and transparency on the funding program, that's one set of things that we need to deal with on a separate issue. Because that is, if the individual neighborhood councils cannot get accurate, timely information about their own spending program, I know the ordinance and the plan says they have to do the audits, they have to keep up with their own expenditures and report. But it would seem to me if we did have a depository of information and a way of reconciling those accounts for each treasurer or each stakeholder for that matter, that would be an important step forward in getting a better handle on the spending program. Now, with respect to the other website stuff, those information that are daily use to them, some of the websites that council offices have are very important. They have information that flows out on a weekly basis. If the information flowing out from department is not of use, then that mechanism to help and support is useless. It doesn't have the effect of bringing important information to them in a timely fashion. I think the CAO and the CLA and the department should sit down, not only looking at the electronic, but we should also look at the website itself and bring our ITA partners into this. And I think they do have ideas how they want to move forward. If it's going to cost money, if it's going to incur contracts, then we should have a plan. We should have a sense of where they're going, how we can get there, and what's the most effective mechanism to get there. Some of this stuff, I'm assuming, can be off the shelf. There are programs you could, and so if we want to use ITA or if we want to use a consultant who is outside the city family, we should still be using the city standards in terms of how we do this, what kind of language we use, what's its portability to other systems, is there ability to interchange information from other systems, because their staff is so small and they really have those limited resources. The website can be a powerful tool for them to get information out on a timely basis in a number of different areas, not only in finances, but just information coming from council meetings, from committee meetings that can be useful to the individual neighborhood councils. So what I'm thinking is maybe we haven't moved too far in remedying the initial problem that we saw being voiced at the neighborhood meetings, but I think we should sit down and strategize a way of moving forward.
Okay. Let me ask, how much money have we spent on the issue of the consultants with the platform? What's the source of that money?
$20,000, and it was from our current year's budget.
Let me just ask, then let me ask the final thing on the board members' contact list. Is that tied also to the webpage?
Yes, it is. That is definitely, and that's one of the contact list is the one that was mentioned frequently as not representing the membership of the boards and the stakeholders.
And if I may, the contact list, the main value of having a city-provided email list is really valuable because at one point when we had our contact list available, there's language in the ordinance that requires us to make it available to people who want to use it. And what's been happening is that people have been sending all kinds of emails to all the board members. So another thing that I hear from other board members is they stopped reading the emails because they're getting all these emails about city policies and advocacy issues. So that was one problem that we encountered when we made our email database public, and people wanted to use it for their own purposes. So that would be something that I would recommend we look at in terms of what we do to make sure that the email list is something that is used for board members, for neighborhood council business, as opposed to other folks wanting to use it to access neighborhood councils to influence their advisory process.
I don't know how to balance that in the sense that to make it available but not make it available. So I think we'd have to rely on the...
It's just one of the things that came up.
Dennis, you have anything?
Yeah, a couple. Looking at item number 1, the roster of neighborhood councils, and then the email distribution. It seems pretty basic. It seems pretty simple. And whose responsibility is it? Is it ITA's responsibility to maintain that? Or is it Dunn's responsibility to get a vendor? And if you get a vendor, you got to pay him. I'd rather see that money go to ITA staff to do that job.
Well, I would say that the responsibility for making sure that the data is current would be ours, but the task of giving us a platform, a software tool that would sync with our website, with our, the funding information and all of that would be something that I would look to ITA to provide, but because of their staffing shortages and budget issues, they haven't been able to do that for us.
But they have certain responsibilities. It's just like when a fire breaks out, you call the fire department. When there's a crime, you call the police department. ITA has a certain responsibility. It sounds like they're not doing what they're responsible to do.
One of the problems that...
It's not an option.
as the general manager pointed out, the website was written by a gentleman or one of your staff members using a certain language. The folks over in ITA may not be conversant in that language.
Well, maybe they need to become conversant in that language. I mean, certain departments have responsibilities. Animal Services has to take care of animals. I just can't understand why ITA just said, well, it's Department of Empowerment. It seems like it's no big deal. Well, our council agendas are posted, council meetings are posted. Why is it not, because neighborhood councils are important, why is it not a priority for IT? You're with IT, sir, aren't you?
No.
Is
He's
IT
with the
here?
department. ITA is not here.
IT is not here. Okay, well,
But I think we need to have that conversation.
I think this issue really troubles me, is that neighborhood councils aren't important according to what I'm hearing from ITA, who's not here, and then you got to go fend for yourself. And you got 90-plus neighborhood councils trying to get information, and it's a responsibility for us to deliver that information. I find it very unusual that they're not doing it. If you call the police department, they're going to get there. They're short of personnel, et cetera, but they're going to get there. ITA is just kind of like throwing their hands up and say, you know what, we don't have the personnel, tough luck. I can't accept that, and that's what it sounds like. Correct me if I'm wrong.
And before you came in, Councilman, we had discussion with the chair that we would meet with ITA and come back at the next committee meeting with an update in terms of what they're able to do, provide in terms of addressing these issues around the email list and the website.
Because if you're going to go out and hire a vendor, that money can be used by city staff. That's what their responsibility is.
Mm-hmm.
It makes no sense that we're like beating around the bush with it, and ITA's responsibility is to do it, period, not a vendor. The other question I had, how far behind is it? How far behind is the website from being accurate and current?
We haven't really tried to update it, and really what we're looking to do is,
Since how long a period of time?
the last time we updated it would be,
The last time we updated on our NC funding side, where the NCs could look at where they're at in regards to money-wise, was the middle of April.
Just last month.
Yeah, we actually, our systems analyst came back for a few hours, because he had transferred to the harbor department, and we worked out a deal with the harbor for him to come in for a few hours to work with us, and he actually was able to download and upload and give that information, because we were farther behind at that point. But we're about the middle of April.
So I would ask, Mr. Chair, that we get the general manager of IT to come to this committee and explain how they're going to accomplish what their basic responsibility is.
You know, what we're going to do is, Mr. Handel, if you can come up and speak on item 1, then we'll give some instructions before our next meeting.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Jay Handel, Chair of West LA Neighborhood Council and Chair of the Budget Committee for the Neighborhood Councils. As a user of the system, it became very obvious more than a year ago what the real issue is. And we're creating bureaucracy that can be fixed very quickly by you guys mandating some things. By you guys mandating some things and having them implemented. About a year ago, we asked that the department change the code to allow the secretaries or presidents of the neighborhood councils to be able to go into our section of the site and update our own stuff. That's what you need IT for right now. Get someone to change the codes and give each one of the councils a code to update their own information. We're responsible, not IT. We're responsible as neighborhood councils. Put that blame on us, but give us the tool to do it. Having said that,
And Jay, that tool comes from ITA.
ITA just needs to tweak the code. But this is not building a new website. This is right now, an individual council person can change their own information, but a council officer can't change the broad base of the council information. It's ludicrous. One change.
Go over that again.
Okay. I can go in with the code, having been authorized, and change Jay Handel's email address, phone number, whatever. But I can't change anyone else in my council.
Or the larger picture of your...
For my neighborhood council. Change the code. Get IT to allow us to go in and change it ourselves for our council. That's number one. Number two, we've made the suggestion, and this is a very quick fix right now. You're going to have a new set of funding coming through for the neighborhood councils, whatever number you guys end up throwing at us. We don't get it until we hand in with our new budget a complete list of all the updated information. If you don't get the information, we don't get the money. It's very simple. This is not building a new bridge. This is not even putting new tar on old tar. This is very simplistic, which is probably why it doesn't happen in government, because it makes sense. So these are two very simple things you could do without calling IT to come up in the chair of IT and his 3 guys he's got left that have to fix 36 departments and rebuilding a website with outside consultants outside of the stream of what the city does, which again, you know, if we're not going to fund the department, we're going to lose what we have, because our mandate is simple. We're supposed to be able to communicate. The department's supposed to be able to communicate with us. We're supposed to be able to communicate with them, and we can't. If I use that list, I identified over 549 bounces off the current list on the website. So it's not up to date. You can't communicate, and if you can't communicate, the department can't fulfill its mandate because the city council has cut the department so far back we don't have field reps to go out to work with people anymore. So, you know, we're chasing our tail.
Let me just briefly give me the second point you made.
The second point.
Yeah, you said there was 2 things.
Yeah, well, the second point was you should mandate that we, the neighborhood councils, don't get our funding if we don't turn in with our annual budget, which is templated, so it should be pretty easy for them to input, budget itself. We don't get our money if we don't hand in a form that they should design on a spreadsheet for about 10 minutes, something that says, these are the board members, these are their positions, this is their email address, this is their phone number, this is what gets put into the computer. Now, will they be able to put it in the computer? Do they have the staff to put it in the computer? Maybe not. That's why we have a C4C. That's why we have the mentoring and volunteer group to be able to go in and help them put stuff in and help prop up the department that's continually being decimated. So again, this is not brain surgery. You know, this is real simple stuff that can be enacted very quickly without stepping on any legal toes, you know, without violating anybody's contract, you know, that we're going around union people. You know, it's real simple. So, simple fix.
Okay, Paul, let me ask you to come up for a minute. Let me ask you, in fact, let me ask you, when is your FSR due?
Shortly, right?
CEO is trying to finalize the FSR by the end of this week, and I believe we wanted to go to council, not next week, but the week after, maybe.
Paul, let me ask you, would you coordinate a meeting on behalf of this committee with the CAO, your office, the department, and IT to sit down and talk about these 3 items that are on the agenda today, and how, and hopefully prior to the final decision made on the $120-some thousand that we, because I think the priority for me is to get the website done.
Yeah.
And that it's then usable, and to look in what Mr. Handel talked about as far as the codes, to where people can update their own systems. We'll deal with the whole financial thing on another item on this agenda today. But if we can look at that in the sense of being prepared to come back at the next meeting with answers about how do we get the website updated, how do we get the list updated, what's the benefit of going to city emails, and a variety of things that IT can provide. What I'm reluctant on, and 2 things that we always deal with IT, is that just as we are today, somebody builds something that only they know about, and then nobody else can fix it. Or, on the other hand, we go get the outside consultant, and then you have to pay them for the rest of your lives to keep it running. And so there's got to be something to where we get IT in the city to create a system that is usable, allow some delegation for the neighborhood councils themselves to update information, that everything isn't going into the done and not coming out, but that we share that 95 groups that are out there, that they can do some of that analytical work themselves.
Yeah, we'll be happy to do that.
Okay, so if you could pull that together, and we'll put this item back on the agenda for next month, but we need to see if we can't resolve those 3 items, and also at the same time, ask the CEO to keep their ear on this issue, so that as we get into the FSR, again, from my priority, I would think it's everything I've heard is that it's the web page, and that we deal with the platform at a later time. If we can get the web page up and it provides that service, then we could look at what can be added to it or what the next bell and whistle is.
Just to add, Councilmember, we're trying to schedule the FSR and Budget and Finance on June 4th.
So we have to look at that. So if we can get that city family group together, I think that would be helpful to them. Okay. All right, so we'll hold this item in committee with that instruction to have a city family meeting on this issue and come back with the information at the next meeting. Okay, next item.
Item number 2 is the CLA and CAO to report relative to the determination of appropriate dollar amount for each neighborhood council to contribute toward conducting the 2012 neighborhood council elections in order to relieve the cost and burden on the city.
Could we do 2 and 3 together?
Yes. Item number 3 is a verbal discussion with the city attorney relative to provide an opinion on the legality of reducing the annual funding budgeted to each neighborhood council in the amount determined by the CLA/CAO in the order to contribute towards the cost of conducting the 2012 neighborhood council elections.
Okay. Let me just ask the 2 public comments to come up. Mr. Glenn Bailey, and after that, Jay Handy.
Should we hear the presentation?
What's that? Can
we hear the presentation?
Okay. Very good. All right, we can deal with 2 and 3. Who's representing the city attorney? I'm here.
Yes, Deputy City Attorney, Darren Martinez.
All right, the first issue is legally in the sense of what we asked for, and I guess that's item 3, is whether the city has the ability to assess.
And the basic or gist of the answer is yes. The mechanism by which it imposed may be different. It may occur through a council motion. There's any number of possibilities that it could occur. Either the money could be kept from the budget that's going to be coming up in the future, or the assessment could be made against each of the neighborhood councils who desire to have an election conducted on their behalf, and then they could simply be a transfer from the neighborhood council fund into the department fund set up for elections. And the department may want to have a comment, I guess, on the mechanics of how it would work.
Let me ask, on the sense of assessment, would it be easier in the sense of assessment on the future year's allocation as opposed to going to each neighborhood council today and saying you're assessed at the end of this fiscal year?
I think it's not necessarily a legal question, but one more of a policy issue for you to decide. And
there's nothing legal problem either way.
Correct.
Let me just ask the CLA. We asked you to look at that in the sense of what you believe, because one of the things that I'm concerned with is that in looking at the city's budget, a variety of things, to I think $600 and some odd thousand plus 120 some odd in the budget, or their current budget, that we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $800,000 in the sense of going forward on elections. And again, trying to figure out how we can help defray that cost. And although it was a very small number in the sample of the survey, that it appeared that those who were looking to have elections in 2012, a percentage of them, or a higher percentage of them, said they would be willing to assess themselves, quote, a small amount. And so we just want to find out what the assessment of the CLA is.
Paul Smith, CLA. The general manager has provided in a memorandum the general outline of how he proposes to conduct the elections in 2012. Approximately 85 of the NCs will be holding elections. The elections will be held in a regional manner, probably to around 10 to 12 regions to be determined by the department. They'll be held beginning in August. The elections themselves, well, actually the budget for the department has something in the order of $550,000 to conduct those elections. Part of the election process will be hiring of independent election administrators for each of the regions to actually conduct the elections. We have heard in the past a range of number of what it would cost to have one of the independent election administrators to conduct an election. The range has been around $4,000 to $6,000. However, if it's going to be done on a regional basis where you have 5 or 6, 7 elections held at a single location over a week period, we don't yet have a good handle as to how much that would cost. We would think that if you did it that way on a regional basis, you could perhaps lower your costs. My understanding is that the department is in the process of doing, I think, an RFP for that service. So I guess the bottom line is we don't know yet. We really have to talk to the department more closely to see what their sense is. If you do it on a regional basis and you have 10 or 12 of these independents come and conduct those elections, just the election itself, not the outreach, based on the process used by the city clerk, essentially the process they used, how much that would cost. And we need to refine that. We need to find out if there is economy of scales in having a regional, what would be the impact on the individual NCs if they were willing to be assessed for that function. So I think we need to, at least from my part, we need to come back to you with a better number.
But one of the things, and I think when this first came up, I don't think the issue was attempting to tailor-make a cost for neighborhood councils. It was a matter of trying to give a general assessment to relieve the budget. And so the thing is that because some of these neighborhood councils, procedure-wise, are far more complicated than others. So I don't believe that was the goal of saying, well, we're only going to narrow it down to where it fits your identical neighborhood council. The issue was trying to figure out how do you defray the cost. And again, it depends on how many elections, how many people choose to do selection versus elections, things of that nature. Those are the kind, and then coming up with a general figure of how do you defray that $600,000 or $800,000.
Well, the department can come up and talk about the numbers in terms of what they're anticipating would be the number of NCs that are going to hold elections during that August to November period. Our sense in talking in previous years that there was this realization from the various NCs that they would be willing to, in some ways, support their own election processes. Like I said, we need to have a more detailed conversation with the department as to where they see the cost for the service, what are the specific scope of work, and how that could be spread across those NCs that are going to hold elections.
Okay. All right. Then I think what we'll do, let's just hold this for a second, and then we'll get to the item that deals with the elections, and maybe we'll get some clarity. Before we move on to the next slide, we have several cards. Ivan Spiegel, Glenn Baker, Jay Handel, Joanne Garb.
Good afternoon, Councilman. Ivan Spiegel from Venice. Most of you're using the city clerk survey as a data thing to make these decisions. Most of what came back is understandable, but when it comes to the money, when the survey went out, it didn't have dollar figures attached to it. So if people were asked, well, would you like the city clerk to do it, or would you want to do it, or you want Dunn to do it, they didn't put dollar figures. All right, so it's like saying, here, I'm going to give you a car. Do you want the Lamborghini or you want the Honda? I'm taking the Lamborghini until I find out, oh, I have to pay for it. All right.
So the results are probably not accurate in terms of the council saying, oh, yeah, we'll pay for it ourselves, without any numbers. If they thought it was just going to be a few $1,000s to pay an IEA, get a place, to hold the elections, that would have been fine. But someone has to pay for the IEAs now. Someone has to pay for the outreach, because the most important thing is the integrity of the elections moving forward. If you don't have that, there's no reason to even have this discussion. So that's really what this money is going towards. The more money you can put into this, the more integrity you're going to be able to buy. Okay, thank you.
Let me just comment one thing you mentioned. We're clearly aware that they didn't have a dollar amount, and
Right.
I think they hedged their bets by saying a sum of the money. And the issue was that we were not attempting to eliminate any city costs. We're just trying to defray, and that's why we asked the CAO, CLA to evaluate this and give us some idea of a figure. So that
No, and I understand that, but I'm just saying the results in the survey, it says 76 NCs said they were willing to pay for the election.
that's only the ones that wanted.
But they don't know what they didn't really know what the dollar amounts were.
Period. That's why we asked
Okay.
the CAO, CLA to fill in.
All right, so I'm just saying, when you use that data, be careful.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
also, we realized that the 76% is only of the group that wanted elections in 2012. So
Right.
we understand that.
Right.
But again, we've said that many people realize that we can't give a lot of credence to the 30% that chose not to participate because we don't know what they said. So we're allowing the 60% to speak for them.
And,
Like-
yeah,
like real
and
elections.
we're hoping that part of this process is that those councils that aren't responding and not even meeting in a lot of cases, this is a time for the department to walk in and start helping them. Help them get an election, help them get up and running. So, great.
Yes, Jay Handel again from West Los Angeles. We've made some very specific proposals, and I'd like to put them on the record so that you can take it in consideration. We understand that the proposal is to reduce the NC funding down to $37,000 in the next fiscal year from $40,500. Our proposal's very simple. Leave the money at $40,500 and mandate that $3,500 of that is designated funds, restricted funds, to be used solely for the purpose of recruitment and outreach for neighborhood council elections. Any of that money not being used after the election period would be swept back into the general fund. Secondly, last year, the city swept approximately $1.1 million from the neighborhood council system, not including what it did to the department, just from the neighborhood councils. This year, it's anticipated it'll be somewhere in the vicinity of about $800,000. The request would be that you take the majority of that $800,000 as opposed to throwing it into the black hole and use it to prop up the system by having proper, open, transparent elections, fully funded elections, so that you will end up with a system that will be the best benefit for you as council people and for the constituents that we all represent as neighborhood council people and the city council people. So rather than taking that money and throwing good money after bad, leaving it within our system, take that $600,000 and use it to have the proper elections, pay the IEAs, and prove once and for all that the city cares about the neighborhood council system, wants open, true, transparent elections, and will fully fund it to ensure that the neighborhood council system will not fail. It's bad enough that we're losing all of our staff members in Dunn and all of our support, and we are stepping to the plate with all of the various volunteer committees. But at least elections should be on your mind as the biggest focus to help us prop ourselves up, and it can be paid for with our own money that you're taking back. Thank you.
Okay. How we did it before the city clerk took over, we ran our own elections. We had, in the South Valley, we had 7 neighborhood councils who banded together as the South Valley Election Authority or whatever, and we conducted the elections, and then we did postmortems on the elections to see where we could improve and what went wrong. We had an independent, we had an IEA from the North Valley who came to all of our outreach meetings. He also, to make sure that everything was fair and square, he also came to our elections and sat there while the elections were being conducted and while the votes were being tallied. Yes, we won elections, and when we asked for the elections, we were willing, I know in West Hills, we had already allocated $2,500 of our money from this year's budget for the elections, and we're trying to encumber it for next year's elections so that we would have the appropriate amount of money for the outreach. That's what we were willing, that was our understanding of what we were going to be paying for, was our outreach and what we had to do, the newspaper ads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Also, I hate to bring this up, guys, but when you run a campaign, who pays for your matching funds? The city pays for your matching funds. It doesn't matter what the budget is, the city has to cough up the money. And I think if we're having to be elected, the city should also be coughing up some money to help with our elections.
But I think if you use that parable, the city's coughing up both sides of it.
In what respect?
They're giving you 40,000, and then the basic.
That's to be allocated to be used back into the city.
No, but I'm saying they're giving you the 40,000. If you're using it as elected official, they have to go and.
But that's not, it's not allocated, the $40,000 is not allocated to be part of the elections. You're not telling us that there's a line item out of the $40,000 that we have to do this much for the elections.
The thing is that there is no line item, and that's maybe one of the problems with the budgets, is that many of them just basically spend as they see fit. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today, is whether there's categories that should be within the budget. But again, I was just going to say, I understand your passion, but on the other hand, I just wanted to bring out that you're playing with house money on both sides.
Maybe.
Okay.
I'll concede a maybe.
Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. Glenn Bailey, board member in Senior Neighborhood Council, speaking as an individual.
I talked to you today.
You did, thank you.
All the wrong numbers.
I was right as far as I was concerned, so thank you. First of all, I support the proposal to designate any amount difference between this year's fiscal year monies and whatever the $37,000 recommended by the mayor, whatever that is designated by the council, and that be specifically allocated to defray a portion of the election expenses. I do support that. I do want to share with you, however, that given the call that went out by the department for the ability to contribute towards the outreach costs, expenses from monies from this year's budget, many neighborhood councils, and I don't know how many, perhaps the department knows, have allocated anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000 on up to, I've heard, as high as $10,000 of this year's money to be used for the outreach component and other related election expenses, and that includes vote by mail. We essentially had no vote by mail under the city clerk because of the budget reductions. We also had no outreach funded through the city clerk's office, although that was originally part of the proposal. So we need to have all these components, and it will be paid for. Obviously it's all city money, but it's going to be paid for jointly as it's progressing now. So I guess what I'm saying is just be aware that many neighborhood councils, you can ask how many, have already made a substantial commitment, you can ask how much, towards that goal of really what you're headed towards as far as contributing to this overall effort and as it affects its stakeholders, your constituents for this year's election that's going to be next fiscal year.
One thing from some of the emails I've gotten, and I don't want to stereotype, but it appears from the emails that maybe the valley may be more in step with that than maybe other parts of the city.
In terms of
preparing for these elections.
Well, I would say a major reason for that is the first 4 regions out of the 12 for the city were all in the valley. And the entire valley were the first 4 regions, and we were all scheduled starting the first week of August. So we had to pay attention to this much more quickly, perhaps, than others as they, oh, it's September, it's October. That may be a reason. Obviously, you have to be paying attention to these memos, that you discussed earlier, the email blasts and the meetings and that. And we do have a Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils for the 34 neighborhood councils in the Valley. And Dunn representatives have come out and spoken to most of the councils at these regional alliance meetings, so most of them got that word through a variety of sources, and hopefully they're acting on it.
Thank you. You have anything on this? We're just going to hold three. Was it 3 and 4? 2 and 3. 2 and 3.
4, 2 and 3.
2 and 3. Yes. We'll hold that until we'll go to the next item. It's number 6, and we can talk about the elections and then come back.
Item number 6 is a Dunn report relative to its implementation and expenditure plan to conduct the 2012 neighborhood council elections, and details as to the number of neighborhood councils that will have elections, the method of elections, and the department's plan to conduct the elections and expend funds authorized in the department's fiscal year 2012-13 proposed budget for the elections.
Let me just ask those that are here with cards, Mr. Spiegel, Ms. Garb, Mr. Bailey, you'd rather hear the presentation at first? Okay. Why don't we go with the presentation?
Owen Kim, General Manager, Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. I'd like to give you an overview of our proposal, conduct neighborhood council elections. We started with a pretty robust collaboration process for feedback, including working with the Neighborhood Council Elections Task Force, where they issued a number of recommendations and positions regarding how elections should be conducted. They supported the model established by the city clerk of conducting regional elections with the assistance of the department and administered at the neighborhood council level through independent election administrators. We also benefit greatly from the work of the city clerk's office. By way of background, before the elections went to the city clerk, the department was conducting roughly 70 neighborhood council elections every year, all at their own schedule. And what the city clerk did a job of is standardizing that kind of ad hoc system of conducting elections and organize them into regional structure. So that is what we can benefit from, and that is largely why we're able to do it at a cost savings to the city, where the city clerk had to spend a lot of time trying to basically reset the neighborhood council elections system. So we benefit by their good work. We requested $650,000 to conduct the elections, and that was based on our assessment of what the staffing needs would be to conduct elections in a fair, open, and transparent way. So the proposal for the elections going forward, that our goals are to implement successful elections for 85 neighborhood councils, maintaining the integrity of all the elections, and we also kept in mind the existing staffing resources and the city's fiscal crisis. We had robust input from the neighborhood councils, and also was informed by the elections task force and the city clerk. We also had a relatively short time period by which to prepare for the elections, and the framework, as I mentioned before, of restructuring neighborhood councils based on the city clerk elections. For the 2012 elections only, we will be basically when the city clerk administered elections, they asked all neighborhood councils what they wanted their board terms to be, and they had the options of 2 years, 4 years, a combination of 2 and 4 years, also 4 years with staggered terms. So that's why the importance of keeping elections on the even year schedule is very important for us, because if we go into 2013, then we run into all these need to reset the bylaws of each neighborhood council, which is a workload issue for the department as well. We'll be doing elections in 12 regions, roughly composed of 6 to 9 neighborhood councils. As much as possible, we're flexible in terms of where neighborhood councils should fit into those regions based on their level of preparedness. I understand that quite a few neighborhood councils are getting nervous because they're anticipating a lot of work related to elections. which is why we're asking them to confirm whether they feel like they can fit into the regional timeline schedule we've established. The elections will be administered by independent election administrators, and those people will be responsible for making sure that neighborhood councils are on track with the major milestones of recruiting candidates, recruiting voters, and then organizing the day of elections. We're also plan to streamline the election procedures as much as possible. When the city clerk conducts elections, they have a certain model that they follow, which is really, based on municipal elections. We have a lot more flexibility in terms of the way that we can do it, and our goal is really to establish a much more grassroots model of administering elections. We will provide an option for vote by mail, and we are the proposal would be to charge them a beginning charge of $500 for setup, and that largely has to do with the minimal cost that we're proposing to do the entire elections for, but vote by mail is an option that has some workload implications. Excuse me?
500 cost to whom?
For the neighborhood council, if they wanted that option. Basically, we're offering a very standard menu, and anything they want to pick that's optional will be a charge to them.
Was that $500 for the vote by mail?
As a beginning cost. So it'll be driven by, say, how many households they want to reach. That would drive up the cost. So that's what we'd have to negotiate individually with neighborhood councils. We won't be allowing write-in candidates in this time, again, because of the workload implications. We'll be providing back office support. So a lot of the administrative tasks that neighborhood councils used to be responsible for when we were administering it, our goal is really to bring on staffing, which is included in our budget, to provide as much of the administrative support for elections as possible. My goal is to really free up the neighborhood council volunteers to focus on the more important role of outreach. So can they go out and recruit the candidates to run for the board seats? Can they spend that time to go out and recruit voters? So my goal is to get them to spend as much time on outreach, and they won't have to worry as much about the administrative tasks of administering an election. We're also providing outreach support. We're conducting a number of workshops out in the regions all across the city. We're conducting 26 workshops across the city, basically teaching neighborhood councils how to do outreach, how to make sure that you're getting stakeholder views into your neighborhood councils and complementing your advisory role to the city. And this is really a great opportunity to basically re-emphasize the role of neighborhood councils, which is, as I go around the city, I repeat, there's two major purposes for the neighborhood councils. One is to get more people involved in city government, and the second, and be an advisory, a good advisor to the city, and the second is for the government to be more responsive to local concerns. And so it's a great opportunity for people who want to make a difference for their communities to get involved in their neighborhood council. We'll also set up a challenge system composed of arbiters, and we'll be bringing them on through contract with the city as well. A challenge resolution process is very important. When we were administering elections, we really didn't address the challenge process as well as it could have, and that's a very essential role for making sure that elections are done in a fair, open, and transparent way. And then lastly, we have the collaboration with neighborhood councils has been very consistent, and we always go out to the neighborhood councils and try to get their input in terms of how elections can be administered. I just want to say that, elections have really gone back and forth over the years, and it's been very confusing to neighborhood councils. First it's administered by the department, then it's administered by the city clerk, and now it comes back to the department. My goal is really going forward to establish a grassroots neighborhood council election process and template that we could use going forward every other year and not have to subject neighborhood councils to changes, because I hear tons of complaints about having to do things differently all the time. So that's my goal, is to provide a platform by which we could offer elections in a consistent manner. The budget for the proposed budget that we had prepared for the mayor's office and for the city council's consideration is composed of 4 project coordinators. The total package is roughly $640,000, composed of 4 exempt project coordinators. And the idea here being that we'll be staffing up mainly in the election years, and that we could wind down, therefore saving the city the cost of having to maintain constant staffing. We'll also ask for $250,000 in contractual services, and those will be roughly $100,000 for the election, independent election administrators, $100,000 for translation, $50,000 for arbiters. We also asked for $50,000 for printing and binding, and $25,000 for office and administration. I would also ask you to keep in mind that because this is the first time that we're conducting elections under this model, that we're not exactly sure of the cost line items. So we would need some flexibility in terms of transferring expenses as we need them, because we don't know if, say, translation costs are going to go up and down, or whether the as-needed positions will increase. So that's some degree of flexibility that we'll need, and then I'm sure that after we administer this year that we'll have a much better handle on what the costs are going to be, vis-a-vis the line items. So that would be one thing that I would suggest to you. That's something it's going to be take us this iteration for us to figure out exactly the true costs. And of course, I'm fully cognizant of the city's fiscal crisis, and at every opportunity we will look to save costs. And it's not that, because we have the full amount that I'll look to spend the whole amount. I understand that we all have to be frugal in the way we manage our projects.
Let me just start a couple of questions. In dealing with it, when will you get a better sense of how many elections and what type of elections, as far as the number of people that may go with the select versus the election, or how many? When will we get that sense of where we are?
I'll also ask Gracie Liu, who's managing the elections project, to help me answer more specific questions.
Hi, good afternoon, council members. My name is Gracie Liu. I'm with the Department of Labor Empowerment. And in regards to your question, I believe by the end of this month, we will have the exact count of which neighborhood councils will be going to a selection process. Some of them are working with their boards and will be meeting in May. We did have in order to do a selection process, they do have to change their bylaws. We did start a bylaw amendment moratorium beginning May 12th. But there are some neighborhood councils that need a little bit more time, so we've been able to give them that time frame for them to make the final decision.
Let me ask you, how much I think you had $120,000. How much of that is done looking to use to help on the outreach? Or is that already earmarked for something else?
That's currently earmarked to bring on temporary project election coordinators to basically help with the planning and preparation. And that is really the only way that we'll be able to meet the top proposed timeline of getting all the elections, most of the elections done through the 2012. So there isn't any money allocated for outreach.
But Dunn has no role in the sense of outreach?
Not currently, but what we are doing is helping neighborhood councils and training them on how to do outreach. So that part of it is something that we're doing, but that has more to do with kind of skills building for neighborhood councils. So we're training them, how to do best practices for outreach. They don't always have to rely on just mailers. There's a lot of things that they can do with internet-based information. And we're providing them with tools, like we're bringing in vendors who do mailing services, for example, to give them some ideas about how they can do outreach effectively as well as cost effectively.
Any consideration on outreach of Channel 35 and what role they could play?
Yes, we anticipate going to Channel 35 as well, and provided that as a tool for neighborhood councils as well.
But is that you're viewing that as a citywide approach, or you're leaving it up to each neighborhood council to?
I would say both. In our budget, we didn't put any money for outreach with the assumption that neighborhood councils would be paying for the outreach. So it would be our role to basically serve as an intermediary to provide them with the resources by which they could use their dollars to conduct the outreach themselves.
I was trying to figure out things that may be free. Because
Right.
Channel 35 is free. The other thing is whether we've considered.
Well, this Channel 35 actually charges
They charge you for what?
Yes.
For information, or if you do.
for the production of the content is what they charge.
Because I thought if you gave them material that they roll, as opposed to you being videoed, is a different.
That could be one way, right? That would be free.
Then the other thing I'm thinking about is any consideration of asking the 15 council offices to use their newsletters and things like that.
That's on our to-do list as well.
What was the total amount that you said you,
$640,000.
and that's not in any budget?
That's in the proposed budget for this year in our department and as part of the mayor's budget as well.
It is part of the mayor's budget?
Yes. And for your information, the
Over
city
here,
clerk.
CLA is saying no. Or CAO. CLA and CAO. They're together. Can we have the clarification of that? Did you hurt yourself? Or did he kick you?
He kicked me again. Councilmember, the department is correct in that they did submit a budget request for the 600 and some odd thousand. A lesser amount is included in the mayor's proposed budget.
What amount's included? You knew I'd ask that question.
I believe it's 550.
550?
Closer to.
Delilah Pucha, CAO. The department was provided $550,000 for the 2012 elections. This also consists of salaries for 4 resolution authority positions, $100,000 for translation services, $25,000 in printing and binding, $25,000 in office and admin, and $145,000 for contractual services. The CAO did not recommend the department's request for the arbiters in the amount they requested. This was a new method that they wanted to use for a temporary election cycle. That's something that we could consider in the future when we determine who's going to do the elections. But for something done on a temporary basis, the CAO did not recommend the full amount.
So that cuts your operation down significantly.
Yes, it does.
And what did the city utilize for the clerk when the clerk ran the elections?
My recollection is city clerk was allocated $1.2 million.
Okay. And you say there's 85 that are up for
Correct.
For election?
Yes.
And then there was one proposal that they would pay or help bring in dollars for the election?
That neighborhood councils would?
The neighborhood council would be assessed, those 85 would be assessed a certain amount to cover for the elections, or partial assessment?
That's what the
I believe
CLA is going to look into.
the chair had asked the CAO and the CLA to determine an amount appropriate to assess on neighborhood councils. We were hoping that the department would have provided a report that clearly outlined the amount included in the proposed budget, their expenditure plan, the hiring plan, et cetera. So that's why Mr. Smith had indicated we need to have further discussions with the department, because at this time, we cannot grasp a clear understanding of how they plan to expend the funds which were included in the proposed budget.
Because I read somewhere about $5,000. Somewhere I read some number about
Several years ago, there was discussion for neighborhood councils to pay for their elections. At that time, we were transferring it to the city clerk. Dunn was conducting it, and we determined the amount to be somewhere in the amount of $4,000 to $6,000. Now that we're doing this temporary election cycle, I'm not sure what the amount is because we haven't determined the method. The method may be a selection process. The cost might be significantly lower. It's done on a regional basis. So the elections are done differently as they were back when we were considering this $5,000 amount. I'm not sure what this amount would be. Hopefully the department can provide us accurate details so we can make a fair assessment. I believe the chair has indicated he wants to determine an amount to offset the general fund, and that's what we're going to try to go back and work on with the department.
And according to the proposed budget, neighborhood councils will now receive $37,000?
The proposed budget does provide an appropriation for $37,000 per neighborhood council.
And originally it was $50,000 a few years ago, and then it dwindled down. Now it's $37,000.
A few years ago, it was $50,000. We reduced it by 10% to $45,000, and then we reduced it again to $40,500, and now it's at $37,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Is this the general cut for GCP, 10% or something like that? Is that why it was dropped?
Originally, yes. Right now, this reduction only represents an 8% reduction.
And it's still GCP though? Or is it, I mean, it's still
General purpose fund?
money?
It's general fund money, yes.
General purpose got cut by what, 10?
I'm not sure.
Council offices were cut 8% too. Council
Not
offices.
I'm not
Their
sure.
proposed budget.
Yeah, but
I'm
I
not
think
sure.
I take back, GCP was higher than that, because I think council budgets overall, but I think your GCP was cut like 15.
Originally, the mayor's letter did ask for a 6 and a 12% reduction, so I know 8% is fairly in between that. Some departments, they do have a higher percent than that 8%.
And just if I can, do one, from our clerk's office, you have money from last election to turn over so we can help fund this time? I knew that would be a...
I'm sorry, you're asking if...
Do you have any money left over from the...
No, sir, no. We were budgeted 1.9. We only actually spent 1.16, and all the savings have long ago been reverted to the general fund.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Do you have any in a shoebox or anything?
Shoebox.
In the pillow? Let me just ask another question. In dealing with this year's money, now, on the line item of the 120, it showed initially that it was 60,000 was going to be for outreach. Has that been changed, or is it reconsidered, or what?
Oh, and I do stand corrected that we did allocate 10,000 to pay for outreach expenses such as ads that we would take out, say Department of Transportation, posters that we could put on subways and buses. So we did allocate some funds for that.
But what is the 60 no longer available of the 120?
No, the 60 is for outreach, but it's also we lumped it all together with the overall planning process, which involves a lot of going out with neighborhood councils. Basically the feedback process.
So these are the, you lumped it with the hiring of the independent?
Correct.
So do you view that as part of outreach also?
Yes, it's the planning process, basically.
The other thing I was wondering is are the people that are doing this independent process, are they also neighborhood council members?
The selection process, you mean?
Yes, part of when you put them out there and they're independently evaluating the election. Are the people you hiring neighborhood council members?
They are not. They would be third-party objective.
Third party?
Yeah.
So there's no one involved in the election process that is actually a neighborhood council member?
Well, they could be neighborhood council members, but we wouldn't put them in charge of administering their own neighborhood council. So they could be from South LA and do, administer elections in the Valley, for example. But we would make sure that they have some distance.
Are we assuming they never speak?
That they would never...
That neighborhood councils don't speak to each other?
Oh, no, they definitely speak to each other.
That's what I'm saying. I'm just wondering if you put neighborhood council, I'm just trying to avoid going through this process and end up with more grievances than votes.
No, we would be sure that neighborhood council, all the independent election administrators would be trained thoroughly. They would have an MOU with the department, and if we felt that they weren't complying with our policies, then we would have to let them go. But they would be accountable to us.
Okay, but again, let me go back. Are we going to be looking at people that are not in the neighborhood council process?
You mean in the election process?
In the election process, as you're talking about this third-party independent, what I'm concerned about, if you take a president of or a board member from South LA, and they now are administering an election in Van Nuys, there seems to be a conflict there to me. I'm just wondering, I can understand they may be a member, but if they're a board member, are we looking to avoid that potential conflict?
If you are speaking of the independent election administrators that we'll be hiring on, we actually did want those who had experience with neighborhood councils and would have no limitations as to whether they're sitting on boards currently. They understand the process, they understand neighborhood councils, and so our limitation on the IEAs is simply that they cannot be the IEA of the region in which their neighborhood council is.
I'd really like to look at that because, again, because of communications and alliances, now if they're all independent, we have 34 neighborhood councils under one alliance. Alliances are meeting with each other that we have the ability to keep it as clean as possible. That I can understand being a member of a neighborhood council or being on a board and running someone else's election, I think just puts us in a situation for grievances down the road. So just look.
Yes, that's a good point. I think also in terms of the time frame in which we have to accomplish this, those that have such experience, it really comes in handy and shortens this training, the training of the IEAs in that sense.
And the IAs, you figure you're going to have about 10 to 12?
Correct. We're looking at probably bringing on 10 and with some backup that would act as poll workers, but could step up as IEAs if we so needed.
Okay. And our election cycle we're talking about is, but it stops in November, but what's starting time?
Mid-November would be the last region to go.
Okay, but what would we kick it off?
It kicks off on August 4th with the first region.
This coming August?
Correct.
The ones who are going early are in the valley, and they're the ones that are most anxious to get elections. So they did a lot of preparation work already. So we're just making sure that they're conforming with our procedures.
When do you think, from the report you've given us today, that you'll actually have some meat on that proposal to show exactly what's going to happen, what people can expect when the elections start in August?
Well, we could provide some more detail. There was some descriptions under each of the positions in terms of what they would actually do. So there was
not just the positions, I mean the process that the neighborhood councils can expect in August. When do we think we'll have that more refined than today's report?
We do have election procedures that we're finalizing now, and we could bring that back to the committee if you'd like to see it.
I'd like to see if we can have, is the ability to have this whole process in a document so
Yes.
that if you gave it to them, they could look at it and say, this is what we could expect in August.
Exactly, and that's currently in
How long will
process.
that take to get that kind of document?
We have a draft that we expect to release to the neighborhood councils for their feedback this week. So a lot of it really is based on the city clerk's great work. We're pretty much adopting a lot of the procedures outside of some of those that we streamlined as a cost-saving measure. For instance, if after the candidate filing period, if a neighborhood council has uncontested elections, so in other words, there's only one candidate for each board seat, we would basically go to a board affirmation process instead of incurring the cost of holding an election where the outcome has already been predetermined. So we would basically be, making a few changes in procedures to show these new cost-saving measures.
Do we think by our meeting in June, you'd have that?
Oh, yes, for sure.
Do the entire overview, the hiring, in the sense of the process that people expected, the cost, the outreach, everything within the document by June? Let me just ask the speakers come up at this time. Ivan Spiegel, Joanne Garb, and Glenn Bailey. And this is on item 6.
I need to say something about this. Since you came in as chair, I think you've done everything right so far. You went out, you listened, and the stuff that you're coming back with and your questions are excellent. I think you're actually getting what's going on. In terms of Channel 35, I wrote a script years ago. I can try to dig it up, where our councilman, Bill Rosenthal, loves to be in front of the camera, that he would say a 30-second PSA for radio and TV, and ending with, I'm Bill Rosenthal. When my councils call, I pick up the phone, something like that. And I'd love to have the 15 council members all do something like that.
They charge us, though.
I understand. But I'm just, okay. All right. And by way of background, I'm not just involved in neighborhood council elections. For many years, I've also been a poll inspector for the city clerk and the registrar for municipal elections. So I have an idea what I'm talking about here. Dunn got it absolutely right this time. They hired the best person to oversee it. They hired the two best people in the city for neighborhood council elections. we had an IEA's orientation meeting, and I looked around the room, and it was all the best people that I saw there. And not one of us said, you can't do it in this time frame. So I really want you to take that into account. You're right, outreach is really the key to this election. Stephen Box, who's sitting here, is overseeing the outreach. I asked if you could have him come up for 2 minutes and tell you what he's doing. It's a fabulous plan for all of us. The key that we found in our council, we put all of our money into recruiting candidates. And then they paid for the election because they sent out the flyers, they got people into the polls to vote for them. So that's a really good model to follow, and that's what we're starting to think about. Thank you.
Well, I know we're in Region 3. We were originally scheduled for August, the week that school started, and it was just going to be impossible to have too many people would be out of town. So they rescheduled us to September 24th to 30th. So now we have two viable dates, the 24th or the 27th, because of Yom Kippur. And us being South Valley, we're predominantly Jewish. So you have to take into consideration Shabbat. So Monday or Thursday would be probable target dates. One question that I would have with the application for vote by mail, I'm an inspector for the city elections and for the county elections, and so I know a little bit about the elections as well. And one application going out to each household, in my household, I'm going to have 8 people who can vote because I have 8 people over the age of by our bylaws that can vote in this election. So I would need 8 vote by mail or ballots to be presented. So how are we going to do that? Or if we send it to each individual household, if they have 2 or 3 people in the household, are they going to have to request additional ballots? So this is something to think about. The translation, I kind of think that the $100,000 that was cut from the budget seemed to be about the same amount of money that was going to be needed for translation. In our area, it may not matter that much, but in other areas of the city, it's going to be extremely critical that they have translation for the budget. And I think you have this, so this would give you the exact schedule of when everybody is going to be scheduled for their elections. Thank you.
Glenn Bailey again. First of all, with all due respect, let me express a great concern that the train has already left the station, and with the first region that was left in the valley for the first election for August 4th, the filing for the candidates 60 days out from the election would be approximately June 4th, June 5th. So my concern is by having a report back coming to this committee on the 3rd Wednesday of June, you're already 2 weeks past that date. I would think that, if you wanted to weigh in on that whole process, perhaps you might want to consider holding a special meeting prior to then. I just, unless the plug is, the dates are adjusted now, that process is starting, and it would have started for the other regions too, except that they've been rescheduled to September. But we are looking at a process with the city clerk, which was 120 days out, 90 days out for filing. It's a more abbreviated, but even that 60 days is pretty tight as far as, making sure that that can go through uninterrupted. Sounds like you want to ask a question, but just so you know, I have participated from the time our council was first certified with our first election in 2003 and the subsequent ones. We were then part of the 22, I think it was, or 28, that was the first city clerk group in 2008. And then, of course, 2010, I participated in various levels, volunteer poll worker, the election development group with the city clerk. I was on the grievance panel with one of the bonk commissioners. So I kind of saw it from all sides. So this is this is something that, it's a tight time frame that can be accomplished, but we can't, it's so tight that we can't have any more delays. So I'm not sure if that was what your question was. Or...
No, I just wanted to make sure we got that in the discussion as far as the timing, because I'd forgotten about the 60 days.
Okay, well, you can ask, Mr. Kim and Gracie if,
Let me ask the general manager to come up again. On the timing of the report and the timing of the elections, what is it, the first week of June? Is it start the 60-day calendar for candidates? Okay, and then with that, then I would assume our goal then is to get that comprehensive report done before that 60-day period starts. So is that reasonable, or in the sense of having that done before they start the candidate process?
Gracie, when does the candidate process just start?
It will begin on June 4th, and I think Mr. Bailey made a good point. We are proceeding forward with those. I'm not sure how much, even if we were to give you this full report, which we will be able to do, how much of it can actually change for that first region. And that would be my concern.
Yeah. My concern is that, so that we don't have people feeling as though they're getting shifted in the wind, that we have something definitive that says this is how the election is going to start. People would expect that through the process. Because the last thing we need about September is to say we've got a due process, or things are done a little differently, or the report comes out after 3 elections. And I mean, that's what I'm trying to figure out, is how reasonable is it? Because we can't push it any further back, because we got to be through before November election.
Right.
So how quickly can we get that comprehensive report that covers every aspect of the election?
I could possibly try to get it done this week, but again, I don't know, if in terms of major changes, it would still cause a ripple effect for this first region, and thus the remaining regions too, if there are major changes.
There could be some operational changes based on the first region?
Even then, it depends on what type of changes that you're looking at. If it's in regards to the IEA system and who can actually be an IEA, we've basically started our recruitment for the IEA already and have received applications.
All I'm saying is to think about that when you select. I'm not asking you to go back and revamp the IEA. I just think you need to keep that as clean as you can.
Right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Unless the chair wanted to, unless it was your desire to make some adjustments in our plan.
The thing is, I'm not looking to make adjustments. I'm looking that you put all the meat on it.
Yep.
So when people read
absolutely.
it, they know exactly what to expect.
Okay.
I'm not looking to
yes.
alter this. I think you need to have how many you think are going to be in the selection process, what the dollar figures are. It should be something to when people read it, they know what's happening citywide.
Yeah, and that was basically what we used the 124 is to lock down all of that so that we're ready to let the neighborhood councils know what all the procedures and policies will be.
And then one thing also, would you concentrate on our letter to you that was dated May 10th, concentrate on that second paragraph to make sure that all those items are covered in that report. And then just my final question on the IAs is that, do we have a criteria in place as to who can be one, or how you select them, or what their background is?
We did, in terms of recruitment, we did put an announcement out to the neighborhood councils. We were looking for folks who had experience. They were to tell us, what election experience they had, what neighborhood council experience they had. And because we do know a lot of the folks that were applying, we do know their history and their ability to perform. So, knowing what's on the line, it really came down to, can you perform this job, and do you have the knowledge for it?
Okay, so if we look, we'll ask to look at whether we can put together a special meeting to get that approved before the June 4th starting date. That's the item. And then the other thing I think we need on that is that items 2 and 3. Hopefully, at that same special meeting, we could have answers back on the assessment costs. We've already got the city attorney on his issue, so we'll lump those three things together for a special meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And what's our next item?
Item number 4.
Pardon me, Councilmember. Just to clarify, for item number 6, we're going to continue this to the special meeting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Item number 4 is a motion, Kokorian, Hahn, and Dunn to report relative to the Controller's audit of neighborhood council expenditures and the current status of Dunn's implementation of the audit recommendations.
Do you have anyone from the Controller's office? Okay, could you give us an overview of the current, I understand that the audit was 210 and that Dunn responded, I think, in 210?
We provided an updated report on June 29th, 2011, and that was our most current follow-up to the audit for the controller. And in that report...
No, that's the one that's attached to your May
Yes.
15th? Okay.
Correct. And within that report, a broad overview is that the controller issued 34 recommendations on ways that the funding program could be improved. Of the 34, 25 have been implemented, 9 have been partially implemented or are in progress. And currently, we are making slower progress, largely because of the staffing constraints we're under, but we feel that we have made significant progress along those lines.
When you gave those numbers, is that the status at the time of the January 10th report, or is that today's status?
As of June 29th, 2011.
June 29th, 11? Okay, so do we have any reporting on what's happened since June 29th?
We have another deadline for the controller that's due next week, and we requested a 2-week extension. And we expect to have an updated report by that time.
Now, with this audit, and we still hear so many concerns about how things are done as it relates to the dollars, has it corrected the problems, or because it seems like that's probably the second biggest issue on neighborhood councils is how the money can be allocated, how it can be encumbered, how to keep a timely process of letting them know, and that comes right probably behind elections. So has this audit corrected the issues that were complained of, or are these new issues since the audit has come about?
Well, they're not necessarily new issues. I would say that they're continuances of the same issues, and largely that relates to the fact that we're reliant on a completely manual system. And that's why I was strongly recommending that we go in the direction of this electronic platform. One of the biggest issues that we have, if you look at the funding system as a system, you have on the one hand, you have the city's financial management system, which was set up for basically large city departments who have trained public accounting staff. On the other hand, you have an entirely volunteer-driven funding system of volunteer treasurers, many of whom have never managed public funds before. As an example of that, roughly 50% of our demand warrants aren't filled out completely. And so we spend a lot of time going after and calling neighborhood councils to submit the right paperwork. And so there's a pretty wide chasm between those two needs versus how the system is set up. And so if you look at the audit recommendations, they talk about things like being able to provide neighborhood councils with a template for tracking their financial expenses. If we had an electronic platform that they could go to our website and we could see in real time what of the demand warrants that have been submitted, this is how many are in process, this is how many have been paid, these are the things that are outstanding amongst the demand warrants that you submitted. That's possible if we develop an electronic platform, but the main problem is that because it's manual, we spend a lot of time on the phone, we spend a a lot of time looking for lost paperwork. And so there's a lot of waste right now in trying to manage this system because we don't have an electronic way of making the whole process as transparent and accessible as possible.
Will some of this get corrected as we update the website?
Well, I would say that they're linked in that way. Right now, our website, as I mentioned to you before, only has static information that we update every other week. What an electronic platform could do is give us real-time information where they go onto our website and they could see all of the information that they need without having to call our number. And then our staff end up having to look manually under each neighborhood council record and trying to track down where they're at. So I would say that the website and this electronic platform, we have to think of them as being strategically linked together in terms of making sure that the content and the information in there is as current and fresh as, and neighborhood councils are using it as much as we are.
Now, you said you have a report due to the controller this month?
Yes.
And just as a sense, what could we expect out of that report? Is that going to clear up all of the remaining issues, or are they still pending?
I believe there are a number that are still pending, and a number, I can't speak specifically to it because I didn't get the request for this report until the last minute. So if you would like more current information, I could come back at another meeting or at the specially scheduled meeting to give you a better sense of what our status is.
Okay. Any questions on number 5? Number four.
I remember a number of years ago when I asked you about auditing equipment.
Yes.
And if there was any process, and it looks like the controller's audit reflects on the lack of oversight when it comes to equipment.
Right.
When I look at some of these numbers on the report, 5.6 million discrepancy. I mean, it looks like a lot of issues, and I don't see the corresponding result of actual major changes when it comes to a number of these items, when it goes from number 1, 2, 3 all the way down. Financial accountability. It looks like things just disappeared, money disappeared, and I think 6 people were subsequently arrested for embezzlement or something.
Yes, that was roughly 2 years ago.
So like 27, number 13, 27 equipment items that were sampled as part of our physical observations. 5 out of 14 neighborhood councils that we tested were unable to account for 27 equipment items. Did we ever follow up to find out what happened to all these items?
We haven't been able to do that, Councilman, but we do monitor the expenditures as best that we can. And again, we rely on neighborhood councils, board members, because they're required to approve their financial expenditures on a monthly basis. A lot of them do it on a quarterly basis. So because our staff is so minimal and we're mostly the time is spent mostly processing and keeping up with the payment requests, that we're really relying on a lot of neighborhood councils to keep each other honest.
But we know that 6 people face criminal charges for not
Yes.
being honest. And this is all taxpayers' money.
Right.
The issue about splitting the purchase to circumvent the $1,000 credit card.
That's no longer being done. If we will freeze the purchase card if we get reports that neighborhood councils aren't following city policies. And I also do investigate when we get complaints from neighborhood councils of other people using the funds in illegal and inappropriate ways. I do have my staff investigate, and then we have turned over those records to the LAPD, so we continue to do that.
Do you ever have any cooperation with the controller's office or any other city entity that goes out and does spot checks, spot audits?
Not currently, no.
I know you don't have a whole lot of personnel to do that.
Right.
And it's $400,000, where was it? Lax oversight over cash advances between 07 and 09, which over $400,000 in cash advances.
Right.
Approximately 45,000 not comply with the policies. I mean, some of the stuff obviously happened in the past since it was an audit from previous years.
And that was mainly due to the fact that the petty cash account was made available, and we closed that down about a year and a half ago. So neighborhood councils don't have petty cash.
How about number 8, $800,000 in purchases for which they have not submitted quarterly reports?
We continue to be behind on the quarterly expenditures, and that's another staffing issue. What we have done, though, is met with the controller and presented to them the challenges that we have of going through 95 quarterly submissions every month, every quarter. Multiply that by 4, and we have roughly 400 reports we have to go through. We told the controller we can't do that. We don't have the staff. So they approved a revised procedure where we're basically taking a risk-based auditing approach, where we look at the neighborhood councils who have consistently have transactions that look funny on paper, and then we'll spend more time focusing on those. But now we have a random kind of sampling approach where we don't have to go through all of them that are submitted. So at least we streamlined that procedure, and we're able to at least make sure that we're catching any red flags should they come up.
What about Office of Finance, Treasurer? Have we utilized any of their resources?
Office of Finance has helped us with the purchase card, and so we are coordinating with them, in terms of making sure that, for example, when the cash withdrawal, ability to withdraw cash from the P card, that was where the embezzlement occurred, and we shut that down, like I said, a year and a half ago.
What about Ethics Commissions? Ethics Commission, you ever get involved and assist with any of the process that you have to deal with?
No, Ethics Commission does have their own staffing constraints, but what we did do is reach out to the Personnel Department, and Councilman Corcoran, the former chair of this committee, was looking at a policy that would mandate, that would have consequences for not taking the state ethics test. That currently is still outstanding. But we met with the Personnel Department, and they basically have a electronic way of delivering the ethics test, which we think will help us tremendously because it also has a tracking mechanism. So every neighborhood council who completes the ethics test will be able to manage and monitor how many are completing and how many haven't completed. Right now, according to our records, roughly about 60% of board members have completed the ethics test.
And what about the one who handles the money? Any observation of bonding them or anything in that arena, or a background check or something to make sure that we can't come into the same situation we had in the past?
We did look into the issue of background checks and continue to do that.
Not that they're a board member, but
yes, treasurers only. Well, currently we mandate training for the treasurer and second signatory. So unless they complete the training, we won't give them a purchase card, and we will freeze the funds until they do so.
But do they do a background check on them?
We don't currently do a background check. I've been talking to the Personnel Department and seeing how we could do a streamlined version. They tell me that there's a way to basically do a fingerprinting. So that's something I am currently exploring.
Yeah, just so that if they haven't been arrested for some type of embezzlement.
Right.
I met with one of my business owners yesterday who had an employee who stole a lot of money, seeking prosecution, and this employee is now working for another individual, same type of business, and they said, well, they ripped me off, now they're going to rip this other person off. So when there's a background check, I'm just talking about the folks that handle the money, because it shows in the past there were people who did commit criminal violations, who did steal to keep it honest, to keep it safe, and at least if they've been involved in that in the past, you wouldn't want those people necessarily handling cash or purchasing items, and just to screen that part of it out.
No, and I agree we need policies to make sure that we're doing the best that we can on the screening end. But, you also know, as the chair mentioned, that neighborhood councils talk to each other. And the fact that we are currently conducting investigations and turning them over to the police department, I'm sure neighborhood councils are aware of what we're doing. So that's also something we rely on, that neighborhood councils are reminding each other that you have to be very careful about how public funds are used.
And what about the DA's Office Public Integrity Unit? Do you ever have resources from that?
I believe that is the division that's coordinating with the LAPD. So after we do our investigation, then we turn it over to the LAPD, and then the LAPD does their own review of basically our documents, and we go back and forth if they have a request for more information. What they've done is actually ask for the neighborhood council board member contact information, so they go out and talk to the treasurers or the former board members as part of their investigation, and then based on their whatever conclusion they reach, then they decide whether they want to turn it over to the DA.
So far, 6 have been prosecuted?
6 have been prosecuted, and we have 3 pending.
Okay. I mean, in addition to the 6?
Yes.
So that'd be 9.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Let me just ask, we got a public comment, Mr. Reeser. That's number 4.
Yes, thank you. Council members, it's a couple years from now, and you're out of office, termed out, or you've gone on to your next great job at the city, you're the mayor or whatever you want to be, that's great. The controller's office decides to audit you and your last couple of years as a council member and take a look at what you did and find some funny things, and so they want to find out what this is about. But they don't come to you, they come to the person who replaced you in office who perhaps didn't like you that much and said some nasty things about you during the election. And they get bad information, and the information leaks, and accusations are made, and huge amounts of money were supposed to be misspent by your office, and it turns out none of it was true. I'm happy to say none of that would ever happen to you, but it did happen to a neighborhood council in the city. Not me, but I'm on that board. The treasurer was audited. They found some things that they didn't understand. They didn't talk to him. He was still on the board. They talked to people that replaced him, who didn't particularly like him. $10,000 was spent without board approval. $4,000 was spent on illegal things that shouldn't have been spent on. $1,000 was funneled to some private group. None of it turned out to be true. It's all in the minutes. It's all approved. It's all correct. Where does that person go to get his reputation back? It leaked to the press. It leaked to the local media. Neighborhood councils all over our area now are aware of this. What happens now? The neighborhood council is in exhaustive efforts. It's been destroyed by this. It will never function right again with the current board. You can wash them all out and start all over again, but you have some public servants there that want to help their communities, and they can't work with each other anymore because of the accusations that went back and forth based on this really bungled audit that was based on this coming from the city controller. There may have been some procedural things, but in the end, not a single dime went into anyone's pocket. Not a single dollar went to anything that was illegal to spend on it. And all but maybe $300 due to a typo were pre-approved by the board. Where does that neighborhood council go, and where does that treasurer go to get his reputation back? I leave it with you. You need to ask the questions. It's ongoing.
Yeah. But let me just say this. I think that anybody that's in public life stands that potential. And I don't have an answer where they get the reputation, because normally you can't get it back.
Right.
But the issue is that that's why good documentation will solve most issues.
Right. And it was all in the minutes.
If the documentation wasn't there,
it was all in the minutes.
This would continue to ride. But again, I don't have an answer for you on that, except that it's good to follow the rules. It's good because there's enough stuff that happens accidentally, and so if somebody's doing something consciously, then people suffer for a while. But what always seems to ring true are those who keep good records and do it legally, generally come out.
It was all there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
All right. Item 5. I'm going to give some instructions on 4 after we do 5.
Okay. Item number 5 is done to report. The CAO is CLA to report relative to the status report detailing the amount of funding available for neighborhood councils and description of the encumbrance process by the department.
Ms. Garb, do you want to comment on number 5? Okay. All right. Number 5 is basically response to a budget memo.
Good afternoon, Councilman. Delilah Puccio with the CAO. The 2012-13 proposed budget provides $3.58 million for 95 neighborhood councils and 2 that are expected to be certified in 2012-13 in the first quarter. The annual appropriation was reduced by 8% from $40,500 to $37,000. The department reports that neighborhood councils are expected to encumber $750,000 through the 2012-13 fiscal year. Therefore, it's anticipated that there will be zero funds at the end of the current fiscal year to roll over or to reduce the general fund appropriation for next year.
Any other comments?
Yes, we were asked to submit a report, and I'll just summarize our response. Ever since the City Council eliminated the rollover policy, which took effect basically last fiscal year, neighborhood councils are acclimating to the fact that accounts have to be zeroed out at the end of the year. So what our department has done is establish an encumbrance process where we set a deadline, and they're basically they have to submit a completed demand warrant by a deadline. What we'll do is try to pay out as much as we can in this fiscal year. Those that we can't will encumber, and we've been coordinating with the controller's office. Last year was pretty messy because it was the first time that we had to do it. We ended up sending boxes and boxes of documents to the controller. This year we worked out a more streamlined process, and think that it'll work out more clearly this time. So neighborhood councils last year, in our report, that they left, roughly $1.2 million was left unspent, and we were able to encumber a sizable amount. It's hard to tell until after the fiscal year exactly how much money will be available, but given that neighborhood councils are getting used to spending more at the end of the fiscal year, we expect that the amount that they leave unspent will decrease. This year, we made an exception, given the council's action to temporarily transfer the elections over to our department, that we also created an encumbrance process specifically for elections outreach. And again, we've coordinated with the controller's office and established a procedure whereby neighborhood councils can basically take a board action and say, designate an amount not to exceed, and list a number of possible vendors that could be used to conduct the elections. And so we're creating an opportunity for them to spend elections outreach not out of this year's money and being paid for elections next year. And so we'll once we meet the end of the May deadline. May 16th is the deadline for all demand warrants. June 15th will be the deadline for the purchase card, and everything goes dark for roughly 3 weeks, and then we'll open up the purchase card again. And then after the new budgets are submitted by neighborhood councils in the beginning of the fiscal year, and we actually, I did include a policy, Jay mentioned, requiring all neighborhood councils to submit their board contact information. I did put that in as part of this year's policy, so every neighborhood council has to give us their board's contact information in order to have access to their funds again for next fiscal year.
So the thing is that for that 1 year, you believe now we've resolved the encumbrances and people have a viable system in the future?
Well, that's always qualified. Yeah, I think it's becoming a little more clearer, but, you know, given the fact that this is a volunteer-driven system, every time there's turnover at the treasurer's position for neighborhood councils, we end up having to go through a lot of reminding. But for the most part, the policy and the procedures are established, and, you know, our ability to encumber on an accurate basis again, is constrained by the fact that we rely on a manual paper-based system. But if we were able to do an electronic system, then it will allow us to make sure that the accuracy level of our work is much higher. We don't end up losing paperwork, and that's where we have a lot of problems going back and forth with the neighborhood council. Sometimes council offices are involved in the transfer and encumbrance of funds. So it's a three-way mix that we end up having to go through to clear up some of the discrepancies in whether their funds were encumbered or not.
Does FMIS have any ability to help you as a department?
Not currently. I had actually asked them early on if they would be able to develop a module specifically for our unique needs, and they indicated at the time that they were pretty much taken up over the next 2 years with meeting other larger city departments' needs.
It's just my recommendation. I believe the encumbrance process, when we originally spoke or brought it up last year, I believe it needs to be cleaned up a bit. There could be improvements to help facilitate that process smoother each year, such as posting the encumbrance process online or in a place neighborhood councils could locate it. I think there's a difference from the department sending out a letter of the due date to submit encumbrances versus an instruction telling me how I encumber funds. So we need to fine-tune that process and maybe set forth a deadline that does not change every year. For example, all encumbrances are due the first Friday of May versus every year I'm going to say May 15th, May 10th, etc. In addition to that, I think on the city side, we need to fine-tune how we balance what was encumbered this year to ensure that neighborhood councils expend their funds for what they encumbered it for. So it's our recommendation that we work with the department to develop this encumbrance process and try to make it as solid as possible so that we could make this better for both the city and neighborhood councils.
And if I may, we've actually taken some of the lessons learned from the last year. One of them had to do with the communications issue. So I made it a point for our staff to reach out to every treasurer, and we've listed every other week to remind them of the deadline. We started that roughly 4 months ago in anticipation of this deadline. So the communications part of it, I think we've covered this year. All neighborhood councils are aware of the deadline, the procedures that are required. But yet again, because of the fact that a lot of them are volunteers and they're inexperienced, they're going to make mistakes. That's an inevitable part of the system.
Let me ask,
Councilmember, can I add one last thing? The lessons learned from the elimination of the rollover policy since last July, we've been working with the Controller's Office. We usually meet with them on a monthly basis since that point. Sometime earlier, like in July through the last part of last calendar year, like December, we were meeting with them more regularly in open discussions, phone calls, emails. Since that point, we have streamlined some of the encumbrance policies in regards to what the Controller's Office was requiring of the department in regards to encumbering on behalf of the neighborhood councils. Remember, for us, it's encumbering on behalf of the neighborhood councils for the items that we cannot pay during that time of the year, especially this time of the year when we get inundated with demand warrants. So we have one clerk typist and one accounting clerk too, who process all of the demand warrants. I have one accountant and one senior accountant who does the approvals. They go as fast as they can. As a background, last year, before the deadline, we received 635 documents, demand warrants, auto deducts, and stuff that we had to process. We could not process, we had to encumber 150 of those documents. We couldn't just pay those in those last 2 months of the year. We're hoping that because we've streamlined some of the efforts in the FMS system, we've streamlined some of the requirements, and we've been working with the Controller's Office, we're hoping that what happened last year doesn't happen again this year. So we have worked a lot in these past 9 months not to repeat what has happened at that point. But it's us, the department, again, who encumbers on behalf of those items that we don't have the necessary staff to process those documents for payment.
Ms. Clark?
Have you ever thought about volunteers during those peak seasons?
You know what, Councilmember, yes, we actually have brought on, the Controller's Office has an accounting assistance program which brings on retirees that we can go through them if we have any savings in our accounts that we can transfer fund to the Controller's Office. We actually this week have brought one of those individuals on board. And that is an advantage for us because, as you know, the FMS system, you need a user ID and a user password. And because these are retired city employees, they're allowed to have those type of passwords and IDs. However, though, I can't bring somebody in off the street based on the security requirements on FMS because the controller would not allow them to have a user ID and password. So our resources are kind of limited. So yes, we are taking advantage of that to take care of those streamlining issues. Again, I mean, we've worked kind of hard in the past 9 months to get to this point. We do have internal process in place, what we want to work and what we want to achieve. We have a magic number of what we want to get to, and we're driving as hard as we can to get to it. And it's basically all hands on deck. We're going to bring hopefully some additional people in or use existing staff to review those documents so we can continue the process and get that stuff taken care of.
Joanne Yvanek, Garb, West Hills. 2 points I'd like to make. At our last board meeting, our treasurer was unable to tell us how much we had in she had figures of what we had in our account, but it didn't match what Dunn said that we had in our account because Dunn hadn't, they were still working on reconciling the accounts. So the figures were off, which is going to be pretty hard to encumber money due tomorrow because we don't know how much is actually there and what we can actually encumber. Something I just thought of as he was talking, the way you can use volunteers is that if you have a check request or any kind of request come in to encumber money or for a demand warrant, you can have somebody who is a volunteer match up the documents. Do they have the proper board resolutions? Do they have the W-9s? Do they have all the information on the people so that you do not have to give them passwords, you do not have to give them anything. They can match. Then once the check is cut or the encumbrance is made, they can actually go in and do the balance of the paperwork so that they are not physically touching the system at all. It seems kind of simple of how you can use volunteers. Thank you.
Glenn Bailey. I wasn't going to say anything, but I wanted to respond to two of the comments. First of all, the May 16th deadline this year is contrasted with April 15th, I believe it was, or maybe it was April 16th. But basically, it's a month later this year than it was last year. That makes a significant difference to councils that meet once a month in terms of, be able to see how things are going. If based on what I'm seeing, I will find out, but hopefully the department won't be slammed as much, at that deadline as they were last year. It's partly because what was said, and councils are getting used to it. But that was, I think, largely a response for the requests, the department being responsive to the neighborhood councils with that later deadline. That really was a request. And I know it's more work for them in a shorter period of time, but maybe it'll actually help them out because it won't be as much. Also, the other comment with regards to the website, I just pulled up the website, and we are getting regular e-blasts, and they're on the website. So I pulled one up from May 4th, entitled 12 Days Until Demand Warrants Due May 16th. And this is a series of postings on the website. Could it be easier to find on there? Yes. You could have a window or a box that's right there on the front that makes it clear, But in terms of the information, easily found in terms of with links and all that sort of stuff. I want you to know, in my opinion, the department, based on the current website and hopefully even better with an improved website, the information is there. It's easily findable, and it could be easier to find. And these have been going out for several months, as was indicated, so that this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone this time. And I think if we keep that consistent, If we can keep the mid-May consistently, if that works out, I think that'd be a good thing.
What you're just saying is that they should read it though, right? Yeah, they got to read their mail. Let me just, on these last two items, 4 and 5, we'll keep these in committee, but what I'd like to have on the next regular meeting of the committee is that we have the updated report from Dunn as relates to the controller's audit and get an overview as to what's been accomplished in 2010. Also, I'd ask that the CLA-CAO and the department begin to work on an overall financial system for the department. We need to have in that financial system criteria that would identify when is a neighborhood council eligible to receive funds, are they in good standing, have they done their ethics training, do they have bylaws that are in place, do they have a financial accounting system, do they have their annual budget in place, that they standardize accounting procedures, and then within the budget itself, we need to have some guidelines as to what are the preferred categories of expenditures, clarity as to allocations, encumbrances, and reconciliation, and then the oversight that's required, and whether we do have the ability to look down the road with FMIS as part of the system, because one of the things I'm concerned with is that we not keep looking for ways to dump things on Dunn. If they don't have the resources, they're not going to get any bigger. But what are the city resources that are out there that deal with things that can do their work for them? And I would think the controller and others might be prime candidates to take up some of that workload. But we need some standardization, and I think we need some eligibility as to what allows us to say a neighborhood council is in good standing. I am very concerned about where 30-some% of the neighborhood councils ignore the city clerk's survey and just said we don't want to play. I don't think you get to do that and then come back and say, give me my $40,000. And so I think we need to have that kind of a standardization. Those are the instructions on 4 and 5. The last two things we have, and I'm sorry, Mr. Is it Turan? We got your card late on item 1, but if you'd like to come up and speak at this time, and also Mr. Reeser, you want to do public comment. If there's no other questions, no other cards, we're adjourned.
Pardon me, council member. For the record, what was your action on item number 2, which is the...
On items what?
We didn't get back to items number 2 and 3 with the final disposition.
Item 2 and 3, we're going to hold in the committee, and that we're going to ask on the special meeting that's going to be looked at, that we ask the CLA and CO be prepared to respond to the issue of the amount of money. We've already got the city attorney's opinion as to the dispersal. That would be a part of the special meeting.
Thank you.
We'll see what that, what's the vote.